All right, what's going on, ladies and gents? Bitcoin sitting at 113,000. We actually peaked up at 114K, which is very important because it means that we're actually overcoming this level of resistance at 112K. Now, originally, this level was support for Bitcoin, and it was actually pretty decent support as well. Bitcoin managing to find, well, first of all, a new all-time high off this level, and then a pretty much, full range-to-range kind of move here, which is absolutely fantastic, like level to level. And that ended up kind of sending us lower. Now, since then, we found resistance there consistently, but we have got on the pop today. Now, this is not a great move so far. It's good, and I like it, but I want to see more out of it. I'm going to tell you what that means. But before we carry on with Bitcoin, let's look at the S&P 500. Simply because, this is kind of, I drew this out yesterday just to kind of like, forecast of like the best case scenario for the S&P 500. And I actually drew it out from this blue candle, okay? Because this is the new, Wednesday candle here. And obviously I didn't have that data. I drew this at the end of the session. And that's kind of what I was hoping to see for the S&P 500, just kind of blue sky breakout, right? Because the S&P has, more or less just been, it's been finding resistance in a sort of weird way, right? Like it's almost even like a horizontal level if you want to, just kind of like cheat with the line a little bit. Like this is still kind of the same thing. And so really, in order to kind of break these equilibriums, we need to see a big breakout. Now, listen, there's so much talk about Bitcoin dying and the end of this bull market that, it feels like I'm talking about it every video. But, I'm not upset about that because it is what it is. I mean, we see this shit happening in every market cycle. But I have to say a little piece on this, and that is, I think one of the main things that can make this concerning is the simple fact that the S&P 500 is more or less at all-time highs and Bitcoin isn't. For Bitcoin, those levels might be, I don't know, 118 by comparison, maybe 121. And we're only at 114. And this is kind of like tripping people out, making people feel like Bitcoin's actually exceptionally weak. I think this is very silly. I think the fact that Bitcoin has kind of held on this well is actually a pretty good sign. And I think that if Bitcoin is able to do something with this recovery above 112, then we're in a really strong position. We're actually much stronger than I think many of you actually even understand right now. And that's simply because we'll end up potentially doing something that looks a little bit like this, maybe even up to this range up here. So we kind of range all the way, and maybe we do a little bit in between. But that makes all of this turn into a deviation, right? I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right? If all of this turns into a deviation, we can even define the range as this, right? Like we can, let's go grab a fresh, clean chart. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. We can kind of define the range as looking something a little bit like this. And, anything that we do above is basically going to be a short-lived deviation. Anything we do below is going to be a short-lived deviation. And this puts us back in that range. Now, this still coincides really well with the S&P 500. It's moving up. It's funny the way the S&P 500 does it. I can understand it's going to be frustrating for people because it literally, it moves up overnight. And then during the day, it trades back down again, which is understandably quite frustrating for people. And I can see why people are getting frustrated about that. But if this is the only thing that you're paying attention to, then you would be missing the fact that we're still trending up. And I think that's really important. We're not trending up the way you want to, but we're still trending up. And I think having that understanding is really useful because this has been a bull market for a long time. And, we've just got a bunch of fucking, basement warriors here that, read one fucking macroeconomic book and now watch CNBC. Or maybe they have a guru that uses fucking astrology on Twitter for their analysis, thinking that, that they could predict the top of the market better than fucking Donald J. Trump. I just think it's a little bit silly. I think if Big Man himself is telling us buy signals and telling us that things are going to be looking good, I'm not saying worship the man blindly. If that's what you think, then you clearly haven't been around on this channel for long. But I am saying that he's a pretty reliable indicator, and he does happen to be president. So that counts for something too. And I think, with the way this market has been looking, the way that it's kind of inching higher and nobody's fucking liking it, this isn't the setup to me, in my experience, that ends up falling flat on its face. This is the setup that kind of, everybody's hating it the whole way it's going up. and then it just kind of pops, right? That's what I'd like to see. I could be wrong on this, but so far I think everything's kind of been proving what I'm thinking correct here. And so this, again, that puts Bitcoin in a really interesting position, because if Bitcoin is able to start making some headways here, then, really it has to get back to the top of this range. We can define the top of this range as, 120, 121. We can define the top of this range as 117. I think 117 is a pretty reasonable level to be watching for Bitcoin here, especially if we zoom in onto the hourly, because we can see so much stuff happening for Bitcoin up at this price level. So this is going to be a very predictable kind of level of, at least interim resistance for Bitcoin, which I would love to see Bitcoin interact with. Because, if we get up to this level and we literally just kind of flagpole and then, send it higher, that would be amazing, right? But if we get up there and we kind of get rejected and, well, then we've still got support. So we're still in a pretty good position to try and attack that level again. So I think that Bitcoin's in a pretty good place, all things considered. I think it's holding on to its dominance relatively well as well. It's obviously been trending up a little bit since the really, really big drop in a bit of a kind of parallel channel, but we've seen so many of these throughout this little market cycle segment that we're in right now. All sorts of different shapes and sizes, basically indicating that anytime altcoins give back some of their power to Bitcoin, it tends to be quite short-lived. It tends to be a very kind of temporary reallocation from alts back into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin does tend to end up giving up more of its value to altcoins again when the market starts moving. That just seems like the kind of phase we are in this market right now. On the 4-hour time frame, it's very clear. On the 1-hour time frame, it's very clear. On the daily time frame, there's still a tiny bit of debate you can offer up here, but it's not looking good if you want to see Bitcoin's dominance going higher, which is what I wanted to see. Now, on that note, as far as Bitcoin dominance going higher, and, because this very directly impacts, alts positioning and stuff like that, I do think here, ladies and gents, that, there is still scope for this thing to reverse higher. But it's about, again, at what point are you going to just, just go into alts, right? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. Obviously the way that the larger funds are going to be handling this kind of issue, or even, single traders that have a lot of money, and I don't necessarily class myself as one of them, but I'm doing it this way as well, is just kind of slowly, increasing allocations as that certainty increases. And that still means that there's going to be, a super healthy reserve of Bitcoin if Bitcoin does end up doing something like this with its dominance, and I can get much better entries on altcoins. And this really would be a huge difference in terms of entries in altcoins. But at this point, you also don't want to be underexposed. I don't think that the answer is being 100%, which much of crypto has been since fucking, somewhere here, maybe the Trump move or something. Obviously, most of crypto has been fucking balls deep in alts since perhaps even the last market cycle. So, that's obviously not what I'm saying. We do want to make money on this YouTube channel. This is actually very important, rather than just fucking getting in a circle and jerking each other off to the same fucking price predictions in a Discord group for the, for the coin, that you're invested in. Instead of doing any of that super fucking gay stuff, we just want to make some money, right? We just literally want to rack it up a little bit. And obviously, if we're taking that approach, it's gonna have to sound a little bit more. It's gonna have to be a little bit more reasonable, And I think that this approach is reasonable. Of kind of just kind of adjusting what that allocation in alts looks like, somewhat on the fly, just in response to what the market's doing, right? I mean, this move for Bitcoin's dominance clearly indicates a significant risk of alt season starting, so you don't want to have no exposure at this point necessarily. Does that mean that we can't do something like this and give us phenomenal entries and then absolutely send it? That's super possible. That's also very, very likely to happen. So, these are things that I want to be prepared for and make sure that I'm keeping a little bit of an allocation for. Like I said, this is going to matter a lot more, obviously, at larger kind of bankrolls, because, I mean, frankly, at smaller ones, it doesn't matter. You can fuck yourself up a million times and just put a new paycheck into the market, and, you're kind of back to where you started, which is really nice at the beginning. You don't have that luxury when you're trading with large sums of money, especially sums of money that are important to you. So take every phase in the market as it comes. I mean, I understand it's not nice to not have money. I've been there my whole life, but, it does come with certain advantages that you're never going to have again. And it's in your interest to use them if you can. Especially, you know, I think we all understand at this point that we shouldn't be in the crypto market if we're fucking flat out broke. You know, but if we have a paycheck we can throw into the market, or a percent of that paycheck every month, that's a really strong position to be in. Like, that's gonna do really, really, really good stuff for your honestly for your mental health as a trader, and that's gonna make you make phenomenal decisions. So that's the Bitcoin dominant stuff. Now let's look at how this is reflecting in the market. Ethereum against Bitcoin has lost quite a bit of standing at this macro resistance level, but honestly it's so minor that I don't really care. I don't think that it's anything significant at all. It's still very much within the realms of, you know, a kind of area where it can just absolutely send once more and smash through that resistance level. Let's look at some altcoins like Solana, just continuing that rip up against Bitcoin. It's had a little bit of a pullback here, formed a bit of a bull flag, and then continuing on higher there, which looks absolutely fantastic. We're starting to see another attempt at resistance for Cardano. So this is very, very interesting. Cardano is one of those made in America coins that, you know, granted, it's not getting as much love as Solana, and it probably won't. But shit, this chart has a lot more potential against Bitcoin. I mean, you know, just to its next kind of resistance target is 50%. But if it's going to get anywhere near all-time highs, you're looking at like 400%, 300% gains against Bitcoin. It doesn't have to get this high. I mean, you know, even 200% up here is pretty crazy and fairly realistic considering what an altcoin, you know, kind of season can be. So I think that's looking pretty interesting as well. There's a lot that's looking good on this show. Like, I don't see the bearish narratives people are... All I see, and I've seen, you know, I mean, this is how I've made decisions. This is how I've made all of the most profitable decisions in my trading journey. It's been by looking at the chart and being like, oh shit, I see support. I see, you know, maybe we lose support, but it's a weak deviation and then we're back above. I see a strong S&P 500. I see, you know, investor confidence being reflected in Bitcoin dominance, meaning that people are willing to take on a little bit more risk, which indicates that people are, you know, feeling a little bit comfortable with the market. And then on Twitter, on Telegram, on fucking Discord, you know, WhatsApp group chats, I see fear. I see blood. I see panic. I see apathy. You know, like I see people sick of it, just sick of it. You know, I see veterans, people who've been around as long as I have for 3-4 market cycles, done, depressed, over with it. I don't think that's how you start a bear market. I've never seen a bear market start like that, frankly. The bear markets I've seen have all started when everybody believes the hype at the top. We're clearly not there. And with the S&P 500 looking, you know, pretty decent, I think, you know, if this bitch rips up from here, I mean, you know, Bitcoin's easily seeing 130. You know, I mean, it already topped at 125. All it's got to do is break that all-time high with a little bit of energy. 130 is just a step forward. And you know what? It's the same unsatisfying, annoying price action where you're only setting slightly higher all-time highs every single time, right? Look at this one, this all-time high right here. Another one. DJ Khaled up in this bitch. Look, it just keeps going. Just constant, slightly higher all-time highs. It's frustrating. But the end result from when we penetrated the previous bull market high to today is we have gone from this initial high of 74 or that initial high of 69 to 125K. That's a really good, you know, high to high move. And we're moving sensibly. We're not like in any sort of parabola. We're not in any sort of reckless kind of, you know, we're on the weekly time frame. This is a super mature chart. We're not doing anything crazy. I don't know, man. Like, it looks to me like there's a lot more space left for this thing to run. And even though it might not be running the way you want it to, like the S&P 500 only slightly, you know, climbing higher every week, it is still climbing higher. The only concerning thing is obviously you can point out that it's like, okay, well, you know, there was strength here and there's less strength here because, look, we're not moving up as fast. And that makes sense. And that's a pretty realistic way to analyze and suggest that actually we're going to just massively just drop the ball, probably a crash a little bit, honestly, a little bit more like perhaps this, you know, like a super steep, super quick one. But, you know, I mean, again, if that's going to happen, there's pretty decent support down here. You know, what does that mean for Bitcoin? Call it 90K, call it 80. I honestly don't care. All of those levels are great. And for the S&P 500, it's a really, really strong level, you know. And you know, could that happen? I mean, look, everyone's going to have their theories. These are healthy, functioning markets. I'm not convinced right now. I'm seeing all of this bearish shit everywhere, and I'm not seeing the prices go down. I don't know. You tell me. What does that tell you? In a bull market, we're still setting all-time highs. Everybody and their grandmother hates the markets, and the markets are going up. What happens if that changes? Humans with their mindsets, we're like teenage girls. We'll change our minds just like that. What happens when people start changing their mind? The market, the charts are already there. The charts are not changing. The uptrend is there. What happens when people start changing their mind? All it takes is one green candle, ladies and gents. Hope you've enjoyed this video. You know what to do. Smash them up. Subscribe, tick the bell, all that good stuff. Check out the links for the phenomenal exchanges in the description down below if you're not from a restricted region. Check out this link right here if you want to get inside of our exclusive program, 1-to-1. It is expensive. It's very serious. Incredible results. No one that joined has failed to pay off their fee within the first couple of weeks of joining, which is sick. With that, ladies and gents, we'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.